So when we talk about sample injection system in gas chromatography, so you can refer to this schematic diagram of gas chromatography, whereby injection system done by syringe, where it's auto injector. Last time manual injection was still applicable, but now most of the gas chromatography comes with auto injector, which is connected to the injector or inlet. Then the sample will be traveled through the column, and it will pass by to the detector. Finally, the response will be um, transferred in the form of chromatogram. So, inlet system in gas chromatography is system. Inlet system for gas chromatography is very important because sample injection is the most important step in gas chromatography. Column and detectors are not much used if there is no sample introduction. Injection is basically the entire process of transforming a liquid sample from a syringe through the inlet into the column. Basically, injection is it's just an injection to transfer the liquid sample to the syringe. And injector is basically it's a device, or it's an auto injector, or it's by human, by manual injection, that perform the physical task to transfer the sample from the container into the GC. So injector is the first part, and then the injection is the process, and injector is the is the device or auto injector or human that perform the physical task of transferring the sample from the container into the GC. Well, GC column. Okay, let me move on to the GC column. So when we talk about GC column, the most common one is packed column and the capillary column. So when we talk about packed column and capillary column, packed column consists of finely divided inert solid support coated with liquid stationary phase, and the internal diameter is between 2 to 4 nanometer. This is the example of the packed capillary column, while capillary column is basically the diameter is even more smaller, the inner diameter, which is 0.25 mm, and it's in an open tubular form. So most of the GC now, they are using capillary column for their system. Okay, well, fundamental problem when we talk about the problem with GC injection. Okay, well, for packed column, relatively simple because the syringe only needs needles easily fit within the bore of the tubing that commonly used with packed column. Therefore, using a syringe to inject into a packed column, or the entire amount of the sample that leaves the syringe enters the column. So, well, we talk about capillary column, which is the diameter is even more smaller compared to the packed column. So the syringe needle no longer fit inside the column. So these are the problem between two different types of column. Okay, well, the packed column and the capillary column. So the special interference between the syringe and the capillary column, where the sample is evaporated and mixed with the carrier gas and transfer to the column. So these are the tubing, and this is the packed column. This is the packed column, and this is the tubing. So packed column, and another problem is packed column generally contains grams of stationary phase, which is the large number of stationary phase material, meaning that a little chance for overloading the column within typically 1 microliter of liquid injection, which weigh about 1 gram. So basically overloading is like saturated, so very little chance for packed column to get saturated with solvent. whereas capillary column is only few gram of stationary phase, meaning that 1 milligram injected sample has a mass of very similar to that stationary phase and leading to overloading. So overloading problem is very famous in capillary column, and these lead to the development of split injection, which significantly complicated in capillary gas chromatography. So now when you run your GC, if your capillary is capillary column, usually we have to choose whether split or splitless. So the meaning of split and splitless, split is basically it go by a different batch. It will split whatever sample that we are injecting, it will go first batch, second batch, third batch, something like that. Splitless is one shot it will go. That is the difference, split and splitless. Okay, let's see this figure. Okay, let's see this figure. Basically, this is the concept. I think I already discussed this in the first lecture. So when we have two different types of sample as a mixture, it will pass through the column. So the one is less boiling point, which has less boiling point, will dilute first, followed by the larger boiling point. So in a way, less interaction, stronger interaction, we can connect with that as well. And these are the example of overload peaks. So the peaks is not even narrow, it is overload, it's very broad kind of a peak. So this is we will call as a broad peak. So when column overload, okay, when we talk about column overload, a simple view of overload column, it's like, when the active place of the surface of the stationary phase become very saturated, so it will start to overload. I mean, the column will be, the peak will be very big. Okay, so this is the theory of the column overloading. So let me move on to the capillary inlet. So in order, what are the solution for to solve column overloading is bigger beaker is needed. So if let's say the column should be bigger, so that is the way that we can solve the overloading problem. So when we talk about capillary inlets, we have vaporization injector on column, and vaporization injector divide into split and splitless and pre-temperature vaporization. So these are the example of basic vaporization injector. So basic vaporization injector, okay, where it consists of the spectrum nut here, carrier gas line, and spectrum here, and gas liner. So the spectrum is basically isolate the sample path from the outside world. So it must provide a barrier that readily penetrate by the injector needle by maintaining the internal pressure without contaminating. It's a kind of like spectrum XXD filter. They are generally made of special high temperature, low bleed silicone rubber formulation. So these are the figure of the liner at the centerpiece of the inlet system, in which the sample is evaporated and brought into the gas phase. So after the process going through the vaporization process, then it will go to the sample will be passed to the column. So the basic vaporization injector, when we talk about basic vaporization injector, for example, many liner designs use deactivated glass wool packing, and the glass wool packing is positioned at the or held in near place of the center line to provide the additional surface area for complete volatility, for a complete volatility, volatilization of the sample to minimize thermal discrimination, trap non-volatile components and septum particles before they reach the column. So therefore, we must wipe any sample from the syringe needle, thereby increasing reproducibility and preventing sample residue build-up at the spectrum. Okay, so these are the example of the column here. So now basic vaporization injector. So basic vaporization injector, Okay, there is always has a common misconcept. Okay, composition of the sample introduced into the column is identical to that of sample before injection. So it's the meaning of this is composition of the sample introduced into the column is same as the sample before, of identical to that of the sample before injection. This assumption is false, except in the case of direct on column injection. So particularly, why this is false? Because when the injected temperature just be should be very hot enough to ensure the vaporization of the entire sample, so instant vaporization of the entire sample. So, and basically excessive high temperature may cause degradation of the thermally unstable compound in the sample. Basically the changes will start to happen. Okay, so therefore the composition of the sample introduced as the column, it's not identical to the sample before injection. Of course before injection it might have a lot of sample, because before it go through the column it's already passed through the vaporization injector, so whereby all those thermally unstable compound will be vaporized. And excessively low injector temperature may cause incomplete or slow vaporization of the sample, result in broad or tailing peak, especially for high boiling point compounds. So therefore, rapid transfer of the vaporized sample from the injector into the column is described in order to obtain highest efficiency, narrow initial band of solute. So basically narrow versus broad. When we talk about narrow band versus wide band, so short concentrated, this is long diffuse, so this is solute band. So this is how the sample will be travel. If let's say the sample is very long diffuse, it will produce broad, and short concentrated it will give us narrow peak. So same column but different chromatography condition. So therefore some basic terms for injector we will use is back flush. So basically what is back flush? Back flush is where we will use the liquid expand to many times of its original volume upon vaporization. So this often causes high pressure plus greater than carrier gas pressure in the injector. So basically, when we do the back flush, so what will happen? The final temperature of the vaporized sample exceed the injector liner volume. Some of the vapor will flow out from the liner. So the amount of sample solvent expansion depends on the sample solvent, injector temperature, and column head pressure. So where do vapors go? So condense to any surface that it's below their respective boiling point, such as septum and carrier gas line. So this is the example of the process of GC injector backflush. So samples will expand to overfill the injector line and the injector pot. So some sample condense on the cooler area, bottom of the spectrum, metal body, and leading. So when we talk about, so these are the example of the solvent expansion volume. So back flush problem is basically sometimes we might lose our sample, baseline interference, ghost peak, and tailing of bleeding. So ghost peak is some unidentified peak that will always appear in our system. Sometimes we just name that as the ghost peak. We don't know what to do with this. So back flush, minimizing larger volume liner, sample injector volume, low expansion solvent, low injector temperature, high carrier gas, and high head pressure. So some basic terms for injector is discrimination. It is common for the entire sample not to be fully vaporized at the time of introduction into the column, because vaporization is more rapid and more complete as the compound volatility increases. Therefore, the vaporized portion of the sample enter the column, a different percentage of component actually enters the column to get separated. This higher percentage is greater for the more volatile component than the less volatile component. So the effect is called injector discrimination. So these are the example of four equal amount of each compound, and the later eluting less volatile shows a progressive decrease in the peak area. So this is another one example of the compound. So when we talk about major factors that affecting the discrimination is the sweep time, mixing, difference in the solubility, volatility, solute volatility, sorry. So class, with that I would like to end this presentation. This is my first time I'm trying this software, so just go through the lecture notes, try to understand. So next week probably I have to spend extra time to explain injector before move on to the planned schedule for the next week. So thank you very much class, see you all next week.